Dr. Sophie Nightingale's research focuses on digital technology and its effects on memory, cognition, and behavior. She joins the Plutopia podcast this time as we explore the psychological impact of social media, identity fraud, online harm, artificial intelligence, and information overload.
One of the things that tends to make people quite susceptible is just information overload, purely that we live in an age where we are accessing so much information all the time. We can't possibly interpret, critically think about everything. So we might well just accept things that we wouldn't otherwise. Especially, there's quite a lot of evidence showing that that's especially the case if that information coincides with your pre-existing beliefs. So, for example, if I happen to be a huge fan of Donald Trump, let's say, and I saw some misinformation around Donald Trump that was positive about him, then I would probably be more likely to believe that than somebody who was not a fan of Donald Trump already, if you see what I mean. So those biases definitely exist. There's a lot of evidence showing that. And then I think, it kind of comes back as well to, if you want to believe something, you will.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the latest episode of the Plutopia News Network podcast. I'm John Lebkowski, one of the three co-hosts, along with Scoop Sweeney and Wendy Grossman. And we do this every week. And we have great guests. And today we have a truly great guest, Sophie Nightingale, who is a senior lecturer in psychology at Lancaster University in the UK. Her research bridges experimental psychology and computer science to address pressing questions like, how does digital technology affect our memory, cognition, behavior? How do we protect fairness and well-being in an age of identity fraud, online harm, and artificial intelligence? Her work not only contributes to cutting-edge theory about human perception, memory processing, decision-making, but also has concrete implications for policy and practice. Current projects in her lab include mapping threats from deep fakes, understanding how older adults are vulnerable to technological deception, and investigating how AI and forensic techniques are reshaping identity and rights in the digital world. We'll be talking with Sophie about how our minds adapt or don't adapt to rapid technological change, what breaks down in human judgment when machines are involved, and what we might do better from design, from education, from legislation, so that technology serves everyone. So, Sophie, welcome to the Plutopia podcast. And I guess to start, my first question is, what drew you into this work in the first place? Like, when did you start connecting psychology, AI, digital ethics, all these things together?
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks for having me along today. It's a pleasure to be here. So when did I start all of this? I think it would have been in my PhD. So I started my research journey looking at essentially how technology can influence memory. That's where I began. So it was, I don't know if you're aware of the photo taken impairment effect. So I was looking at when somebody takes a photograph of an object or an item in the world, does it mean that then they're less able to remember that later than if they just viewed it and didn't take a photo? So that's where I began. But actually that progressed quite quickly into, I became really interested in still photography, but fake photos. So I think this was around sort of 2016, something like that. Photoshop was incredibly present in our lives. And so I started to look at, well, can people identify real and manipulated images? And I think it just kind of carried on from there, really. Yeah.
Well, and back then it was maybe a little bit more challenging to create fake images. This was before we had our AI helpers to help us produce
Absolutely.
things that look very real.
Yeah, so I think
Hmm.
then it was hadn't been democratized, shall we say. So I think that the thing that we now have is with generative AI is almost anyone can create convincing fake images, even videos. I think we're almost there with video, right, with Sora 2, etc. But back then it was slightly more in the hands of the experts, if you will. Yeah, and now it's just a wild, it's just wild,
The Wild West.
Wild West.
So how well can we spot fakes?
Yeah, good question. So generally speaking, so I've run like maybe up to 10 studies using slightly different stimuli. So with uh, photos edited in Photoshop through to AI generated images, we're somewhere in the region of sort of chance performance, 50%, through to about maybe 65%. That tends to be the window of accuracies that I get on average in studies. Now, what I always find is that there are some people who do exceptionally well at these things, a handful of people, but generally speaking, on average, a little bit better than chance is how people do.
And it's kind of makes me think of many years ago. I mean, in the early years of the internet, when IRC chat was more of a thing than it is now, and I know it's still out there and people are still using it, but at the time I was in an IRC chat room and there was one other person in there with me, this very pleasant person named Eliza. And we started having a conversation, and I pretty quickly figured out that I was talking to a bot. But I couldn't tell you how I figured it out. It was
Wasn't the
like,
name Eliza a kind of a clue? Given that
well, yeah, but
the original computer therapist in 1969 was called Eliza.
I didn't think that deeply about it actually at the time. I mean, I was just like having this conversation, but I could sense it, you know. I mean, there was something about it, like something was happening that told me that this was a bot that I was talking to. And I just wonder if people maybe get a sense that something is fake or is not real without really going through any process where they like analyze it or think about it that much, but just kind of at some level, at some gut level, they can sense that there's that they're looking at a fake. They don't have to see that like President Trump has 6 fingers in this particular video.
Yeah. I think there's some sort of unconscious feeling potentially that does influence us. I mean, of course, it's very difficult to test because to tap into that is hard. But so with faces, that's sort of what I've been doing more recently is testing sort of the realism of AI generated faces. And what we've done recently is we've been piloting a study where we give people up to I think they view the image for up to sort of a second versus 2.5 seconds versus 5 seconds versus unlimited. And we're not seeing any difference in performance across those timings. So, that I think there is something that happens quite instinctually almost or instinctively. But how you measure that? I mean, another tap into that is when we ask people explicitly, how are you doing this? What are you using? What cues? People aren't very good at telling us, right? So people aren't particularly aware of, even when they get it right, unless it's very obvious, they're not particularly aware of how they're doing it.
Yeah, National Public Radio in the United States asked some former OpenAI employees about Sora 2, and they were saying that the company had tried to put in guardrails for abuse, and it doesn't seem to be helping because as soon as there's a guardrail, there's a thousand programmers who say, "Well, I can work around that." Do you see any hope for any kind of actual administrative restraints on these programs, or is it just out of control?
I mean, yeah, it's a really, really good point. The guardrails are very limited. It's a challenge, isn't it? People see that as, well, I'm going to break it, and people do all of the time. Some of them don't even have guardrails, by the way. I'm pretty sure, um, Grok, I don't think has. There's some suggestion was actually developed to create quite sexually explicit content. So um, I think. I'm not overly optimistic in terms of guardrails and that approach. I think we need a lot more to be done, a lot more sort of responsibility, perhaps from some of these big tech firms, a little bit more accountability, a little bit more consequence in terms of when people do take the remove those guardrails. Well, what's the consequence of that? I mean, I haven't seen much at all so far. I don't know if any of you have.
Well, how good is AI at spotting AI fakes?
Hmm. Yeah, a little bit better than humans, but not perfect. Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
The thing about guardrails, though, is, you know, that might its only chance of working really is in a highly centralized world where you have a small number of companies that you've found some way to call to account. But the history of computing suggests that eventually there will be distributed versions of these tools, that they will, that instead of requiring billions of dollars in funding, eventually they become, what starts as a very expensive mainframe ends up as a cheap chip in your pocket. I mean, I remember when a 5 megabyte drive cost thousands of dollars, and now you can stick a couple of gigabytes on a little tiny thing. And so if it went that way, it seems to me you can make laws and you can punish people who break them, but it would be impossible, it seems to me, to create a system of guardrails that would work for all those different democratized AIs.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's true. I think guardrails maybe are too limiting in the sense of what they can do. But maybe if we could actually get more of the ethical design, why are certain things being put out in the first place? What's the purpose of them, and why are they being trained in particular ways? Could we get into improving things that way? Again, I'm not sure that it will happen, but
Well, isn't the first question what you're trying to protect against? I mean, computer security people talk of the threat model. Like, what is the thing you're trying to have to prevent? And until you've defined that, you can't really set policies that will prevent it. And I think that's kind of the problem, is we don't really know what AI is good for yet, or what this version of AI is good for yet.
yeah, and it's also who's deciding what the threat model should look like, right? Because I don't, from my point of view, it shouldn't just be sort of the developers, the tech experts doing this, but actually we need people from a range of backgrounds, disciplines, etc., to be saying, well, actually, this is where a harm could manifest, etc. Because some people may not see things as potential harm, and others will. So it's just really hard. It's really challenging.
Yeah, the thing, I saw Sophie speak at the Greenwich Skeptics in London, and the presentation you did that night, you talked a lot about the specific study you ran to see if training could help people better distinguish between fake images and real images. Could you go into a little bit of detail about that? Because it was really, really interesting, and I think probably people listening to this would be curious how you do that kind of research.
Yeah, so some of the work I presented, it was very much on AI generated faces, and we used faces that were generated by StyleGAN 2 and faces that had been generated using Adobe Firefly, so the diffusion model as well as the GAN model. And then we had real faces too. And we basically showed participants a random selection of these images. And we asked them simply to tell us for each one, is it real or is it AI generated? Now, what we found was, I think performance was, it was very close to chance performance. So we had the two response options, meaning chance is 50%. I think we got about 48%, something like that. What we then did was we wondered, well, could we improve people's performance on this task by outlining some of the sort of the synthesis artifacts, or some of the things that tend to go wrong when you generate these images. So we told people things like, look out for errors in the jewelry. So it was quite commonly known that necklaces might appear only halfway across the neck and then disappear, or that earrings might not match, or that there could be quite unusual misalignments in the ears or something like that. So look out for a range of these things. We walked people through. And then we ran another study, the same as the first one, but obviously with that training. And we found an uplift of around about, I think it's about 9% in performance. So they did do better, but not a lot, so it does question how useful these training approaches are. They're doing something, obviously, but then arguably, as the synthesis processes get better or just create different artifacts, those specific training modules kind of become less useful anyway. So yeah, I think training has a helpful but somewhat limited influence.
There's a new buzzword now in AI, sovereign AI, which is being proposed by governments as a way to control the national security implications of AI. Have you looked into that concept at all? It just was hitting my news feeds the last couple of days.
No, I haven't heard of that. No.
Yeah, it's basically the United States wants to have control over any AI that has national security implications or economic implications. So, Wired just came out with a article about it, and I've only been able to look at it briefly, but it sounds like that's going to be the new battlefield, because China is very much saying, you can use our stuff however you want. And now that's going to be a point of contention between the West and the East.
That's actually part of a wider movement. There's a lot there's a lot of concern in Europe and elsewhere about being dependent on technology from US companies that may follow the mandate of a government that wants that wants things, that has an agenda that is not necessarily compatible with other countries. And there've been, part of data protection law has been this concern about the US authorities being able to command Microsoft or somebody to hand over data on European citizens. So there's kind of a push for technological sovereignty generally in a number of countries. I think Germany has just announced it a little while ago that it's dropping Microsoft Office in favor of open source software and things like that. And you're seeing that places where, they want to have an infrastructure that they can control and they can inspect and they can modify. And so at a guess, I would suspect that this is part of that more broad movement.
Yeah, I'll have to look into that in a bit more detail. But I mean, it makes me think as well about the discrepancies in regulation over AI across various jurisdictions as well, right? So, things are emerging at different rates. Countries are sort of buying into policies, etc., in different ways, and it kind of just, the playing field is not level, let's say. I guess it often isn't, but I think that's going to have consequences as well for what we see in the future and how things develop.
Somebody I met from Australia was talking about the country being an AI taker rather than an AI exporter, I think. There's an awful lot of countries that are conscious this is going to be something that is pushed upon them, not something that they develop at home.
Yeah.
John, I think you had something.
I was just going to say there's diverse thinking about what is and isn't ethical. And, if we're creating technologies with global consumers or markets or whatever in mind, and we kind of have to, and also global political frameworks, geopolitics, we have to figure out how to address that diversity of ethical framing, and we also have to be concerned about countries where ethics seem to matter less. I mean, we have this concern about the US right now. We feel that ethics is not, there's not a strong ethical framework for the current leadership of the United States right now. And you can see that in other countries too. Uh, I mean, the whole question of ethics is just huge right now, it seems to me.
Yeah. So, I mean, it begs the question of if you can't develop a certain AI tool in one country because of regulation or whatever, will you just take it to another country where it's possible? And then once you put it out, anyone can access it anyway. So, yeah, how you get around, well, it's quite easy to get around, but how you stop people getting around that is incredibly difficult.
I think you've just landed us on age verification.
Ah, yes.
Americans may not realize that for the last couple of months, British internet users have been struggling with the new requirement that there's a lot of different types of sites that are required to age verify users. And I have, for the purposes of research and just because I'm lazy, have decided to be a child. And every so often there's something weird, Blue Sky or Reddit or somebody won't show me, you know, and it's interesting to find that out. And sometimes it's just absurd. I forget what it was that had been, oh yes, the screenwriter Josh Olson had posted a picture of Gavin Newsom and Donald Trump's heads on these very muscular bodies with little tight shorts, you know, and something about a cage match. And that was hidden for me on Blue Sky, marked adult content, not nudity.
How
And
did you verify yourself as a child?
you don't verify yourself as a child. You have to verify yourself as an adult. So I just didn't verify myself.
No, but I mean, you said that you're representing yourself as a child. You're
In the
just
sense that
identifying as a child.
I have not proved to them that I am over 18. So they are forced to consider everybody who has not proved that they are an adult. They are required to consider them as a child. So
I'm
Blue
not
Sky,
sure I could prove that I'm an adult.
well, you could probably come up with a passport or a driver's license or something with your date of birth on it, even if it's a lie.
Yeah, but if they talk to me for 10 minutes, they're going to have questions. Sorry, that's a joke.
It's not
Yeah,
happening.
the problem with getting your identification out on the internet is you're going to be very likely to be have an identity fraud perpetrated upon you, and that happens. That happened to me actually, and I had to do a lot to undo that damage. So, yeah, that's the problem with having biometrics or personal, identifying information just out in the wild.
Right. Well, this is why a number of people either have chosen instead to use a VPN so that the site thinks they're coming from somewhere else. And it's very interesting if I log into Blue Sky pretending to be coming from Australia or the US, the same account is treated as an adult. And I have all the extra privacy settings that I can do what I want with. But if I come in from the UK, same account, you know, a whole bunch of stuff is set for me and I can't change it. Anyway, this is not really Sophie's research, but
Yeah, exactly.
but the point
gone
is that
far afield.
an entire nation has been downloading VPNs because it's there is a genuine conflict between the privacy invasiveness of uploading pictures and passport details and stuff like that to these unknown places that are going to verify your age.
Yeah, we have that experience too in Texas.
Oh,
They
that's
have
right.
some
That's
age
right. I'd
verification
forgotten.
requirements. So VPNs are popular here for sure.
But bypass. But that's an example of where even quite ordinary people are bypassing technological barriers because they can and because there's a sufficient motivation to do so.
Mm.
Mm. Can I
What?
ask?
So, oh,
Sorry, go ahead.
let me just ask real quick. what do we really know about the reasons people fall for not just deep fakes, any kind of misinformation or deception online? I mean, do people have specific kinds of cognitive biases or memory quirks that make them more vulnerable to that sort of thing?
Definitely, and that all varies in in terms of the individual, of course. But one of the things that tends to make people quite susceptible is just information overload, purely that, we live in an age where we are accessing so much information all the time. We can't possibly interpret, critically think about everything. Um, so we might well just accept things that we wouldn't otherwise. Especially, there's quite a lot of evidence showing that that's especially the case if that information coincides with your pre-existing beliefs. So, for example, if I happen to be a huge fan of Donald Trump, let's say, and I saw some misinformation around Donald Trump that was positive about him, then I would probably be more likely to believe that than somebody who was not a fan of Donald Trump already, if you see what I mean. So those biases definitely exist. There's a lot of evidence showing that. Um, and then I think, I think it kind of comes back as well to if you want to believe something, you will. And it's as simple as that sometimes.
I think we're seeing a lot of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a tendency to want to believe things. And of course we have cults forming and we have people with absolutely weird belief systems. And well, here's a question. Do you study that sort of thing in your lab?
Which sort of thing?
Like cult formation and cult belief systems, that sort of thing. Things where people actually form into large groups of people who have shared strange belief systems.
Mm, not not entirely. So we do a little bit of work around the manosphere and how people kind of are becoming or being recruited, if you will, into the manosphere and the sorts of levers that people will pull on, to bring perhaps teenagers into that space. So comms groups, that kind of stuff. We do a little bit on that, but it's not the focus of the work that we do.
How do you define manosphere?
Well, so yeah, so it's an online space that is kind of pushes sort of misogynistic views, negative views towards women. Uh, yeah.
Well, we have a political party that does that, so there's a lot of that going on just in the GOP in the United States. Of you know, you can't have women warriors anymore. They have to be slim, trim males in our armed forces, according to the Secretary of War, who's no longer defense; it's war now. So we have our own cults forming here in the government.
Yeah.
I thought actually you could have women warriors as long as they were physically as capable as men and they could pass the same tests.
I think they're trying to diminish that, if not do away with it, but it's a
Well,
little hard to
Britain
tell.
Britain has the Reform Party, which is rising in the polls, and there's a
Mm.
lot of concern about that too.
Yeah, they're doing very well. Yes. But yeah, I don't really understand. No, I do understand why. They play on insecurities, vulnerabilities, and they do it very well. So I think that's why. But yeah.
And also, there's
So
a certain amount of dissatisfaction with the current government,
yes.
and nobody has forgiven the last government yet. So, there's something new. So
Yeah. I mean, I think it will take a while before the Conservatives are forgiven for their performance. But yeah, no, I think that's right. Dissatisfaction. It's always easier, isn't it, as a party that isn't in power to say, "Oh, I'm going to do all these things," and they really do say it. But I mean, that so the manosphere and that kind of that kind of messaging, unfortunately, is seemingly on the rise, and that feeds into, I think, some of the other work that we're doing in the lab on violence against women and girls, and the use of AI, particularly to create non-consensual intimate imagery. So that's another thing that we are focusing on.
One of the more interesting researchers I've encountered in the last 10 years is Leonie Tanzer at UCL, who started very early, saw the potential for the Internet of Things to be used to harass victims of domestic violence. Does that play into some of your work also, the specific devices, or is it more online stuff?
Some more online stuff we're doing, so more around the creation and sharing of non-consensual intimate imagery, and then identifying instances of that online and working to get it removed or to get the whole platform removed if we possibly could. Again, quite a challenging space to work in, but those are the aims, to try and remove some of that content, and at the very least, allow the individual who's been targeted to have awareness of what's being shared about them if they want to know, and to work with them to report to the police if that's something that they want to do, because it is now in England and Wales, it's become legal to create and share that type of content.
Recently, I've been reading in history groups online that AI is being used to rewrite history. Have you encountered that whole problem of suddenly a revered historical figure is made to be an evil person, or an evil person, Adolf Hitler, is made to be an angel? Have you encountered that a lot?
No, I haven't actually. I've heard about it, but it's not tapped into the work that I do too much. But it makes me think of some of the fears that people have been talking about recently in terms of how useful is the internet going to be in the future, because it's being kind of swamped with AI generated content and also misinformation, and things that aren't necessarily true. So it's sort of, are we going to move away from it? What are we going to hit a post-internet era? Is that possible? So that's one of the theories that I've sort of heard about recently. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I find it interesting because I've been on the internet long enough to remember when we tended to regard it as unreliable. And I remember a friend of mine writing a piece in the newspaper he was working for at the time saying, I did this research and this research, and I suddenly realized that every website I had looked at was a reliable source, and this was a big shock to him. And this was around, I don't know, 1998, 1999, when you had, serious medical organizations coming online and putting up data, and, you'd have libraries and universities and so forth. And you didn't quite have Wikipedia yet. And for a long time, people were very suspicious of Wikipedia. Now people have sort of gotten used to it, but it does seem very funny to me to be coming or very sad also, to be coming full circle to where you have to look at every source carefully and ask, whose agenda is behind it.
Yeah. I think that taps back into a little bit of what I was saying earlier in terms of the information overload and some of the biases that we might hold in that, who has the time really to look into every single piece of information that we access online? I don't think anyone does. So it's trying to pick out anything that you're a bit suspicious of. I think it's trying to pick those bits out and sort of interrogate them a little bit more, try and understand, well, what is the source of this? Why might somebody have wanted to post this? What could an alternative motive been for posting it, etc. But then if we're already only identifying things as suspicious if they don't align with what we think already, then that's also a problem, right? So, but yeah, those critical thinking approaches, I think they do work, and there's evidence to show that they're effective. But pair that with how much information we come across, and most people aren't going to be able to do it.
Yeah, I found myself doing a lot of fact checking online, and I think that we have a responsibility to do that if we're in a position to do it, to call things out as much as we can.
Mhm.
Um, I have, I know another part of your research is you've been looking into desensitization to violence because of persistent representations of violence in media. Can you say a little bit about what you're finding there?
Um, I don't know. Which research is that? I
I thought I saw that in looking into it. Is that something that you look at?
not particularly,
Oh,
actually.
okay.
I mean, I could speak to it in terms of what we tend to see, I suppose, in any of these areas is the more people kind of access extreme content, I guess the more they want to sort of engage with the next level, if you will. So, it can be a route to radicalization, things like that. Um, yeah. So I
I
think
mean, it's
people.
kind of
Sorry, go on.
it's, it's something I've been concerned about because I basically am an advocate for free speech and believe that people should be free to make representations fairly openly. But I know that it, there's so much of what we see in media now is violent, like depictions of violence. And I think the effect of that is not necessarily to make people want to be violent or to become more violent, but I think it makes them uh, less responsive to violence. It's just sort of like, oh, well, that's just kind of like an inherent part of the environment we're in.
That's
And that
what,
was the thing that I was concerned
yeah,
about.
sort of less shockable, if you will, is
Yeah, exactly,
yeah.
exactly.
I know
Do you
with
not
yeah,
do
sorry,
you
go on.
not think that the bigger effect in that direction is from real world violence? I mean, you know, and also partly, and I hate to say this as an American, but the culture in America, in Britain there was one school shooting, and the next week no one was allowed to keep handguns at home, you know, and they happen all the time in the States, and nothing ever seems to change.
Well, I think it's both. I think the things that are actually happening, I mean, we see this every day now. We see these Proud Boys dressed up as ICE policemen now. I mean, ICE has hired a bunch of people who are basically rough guys, and they're treating people badly. And it's happening over and over again. And there's a sense that people are sort of just accepting it. You don't see the kind of outrage that you would expect.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. One of the things that we've seen as well is with younger people, I suppose, in particular, and how easily they can access violent material now, particularly online, but I suspect in real life in the real world as well. And it, begs the question of, is it okay? Like, should we be doing more to protect these people? I know there are age verifications in some countries, but many don't have them. I think it was when the Charlie Kirk shooting happened, there were videos of that all over the social media platforms. And I think it was the case that algorithms were recommending this content to people, even if they hadn't clicked on it. It was just playing in their feed on their social media account. And the psychological impacts, I mean, I'm not an expert on those things, but the psychological impacts of seeing that kind of content must be phenomenal for some people at least, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know, was there
Well,
a rise in violence after the assassination of JFK?
yeah, I'm not sure about that. I do recall
Because
that
that
it
was
was
on
kind of
television.
horrifying to watch the Zapruder tape, and to actually see the shot.
Yeah, it didn't happen so much. I was working in news at that time, and when Martin Luther King was assassinated, that was a whole different situation, and then there was a extreme number of violent uprisings throughout the country. So it kind of depends on the situation. The JFK assassination was so you know new. It was a new thing. People weren't accustomed to political assassinations. Now it's kind of it's we had another one. So people have become desensitized in this country.
Mm.
Yeah, I think that's true. Another question is, and I wonder if you've looked at this. Um, we've talked a lot about deep fakes. There's also frauds and scams online. Have you looked at specifically at how older adults interact with online spaces and the issues that they might be having?
Yeah, we're actually doing some work at the moment on that. So we're looking at the effects of some of the measures to support and like things like debunking, for example, and pre-bunking, things like that, and how effective they are for our older adults. Um, so far, so this is led by a PhD student at the moment called Holly. And so she's found that generally speaking, these types of interventions are quite effective. And she's going to follow up with a series of studies to look at just how effective they are for older adults versus younger adults. So we can, yeah, certainly talk about that at a later date, or maybe Holly will come on and tell you about it at some point herself, in fact. So yeah, work in progress, but it looks like some things do work, but perhaps not as well as for younger adults. That's sort of the hypothesis, but
Are you looking at any of the companies that are trying to develop AI detection software to confirm whether or not there are, deep fakes out there? If they, McAfee and Reality Defender are ones that are doing it right now that I'm aware of. Have you seen any success from these applications, or is it too early in the game?
so I'm always a little bit unsure how effective they are, partly because they tend to be proprietary and you can't actually look at what they've been trained on and what the measures and the metrics are and things like that. I think they claim to be incredibly effective. I think 100% effective. Some of them say they are. I'm not sure. I haven't tested them, and I would say they need rigorous testing before we perhaps should put too much faith in them. And I don't think that's fully been done yet by external independent researchers.
Yeah, the proprietary software is a problem anyway. And today, I believe, is the day that Windows 10 is no longer being supported by Microsoft. And a lot of environmental groups are up in an uproar about this because suddenly you're going to have 400 million computers that are going to end up in landfills or in e-waste programs because people can't get protection for Windows 10. And so that, software in general has become very sketchy in its, ethics, if there are ethics at all.
Yeah. I mean, it does just point to the money making side of things, and ethics just gets left behind, I think. Or at least that seems to be the case often with these software and apps and so on and so forth. But how do you change that in we live in a fairly capitalist world. How do you change that and turn it around to make people care more about the ethics, and the people who can actually or make a change, right? I don't know. It just seems to be, perhaps this is too negative, but it seems to be very money driven.
Well, we're kind of hyper capitalists now. I mean, we balanced those things, I think, better in the past. I mean, when I was younger, I didn't feel that we had quite the same issue of greed overpowering ethics entirely, and we didn't have. I mean, currently we have a government where greed is considered paramount, and ethics, kind of trailing far behind. Um, I
Yeah.
don't know. It's kind of a strange thing. I know that we go through cycles and that we'll probably get back. I mean, ultimately, you would think, or you might hope, that there would be a reaction to the the excesses that we're seeing now. But we talk about like the big seven in the U.S. We have these seven huge monopolistic technology companies that sort of they're most of the stock market activity is around these particular companies, and they really dominate the economy right now. And and the people that lead those companies are starting to seem, I like Scoop's term, sketchy, a little bit sketchy there. Um, we have people who are anti-monopolistic too, who are trying to deal with that. But meanwhile, you have these guys there who are not necessarily going to uh, come down with a strong ethical position. And I don't really know. I don't. I don't see how that cycles out yet. I know it's bound to at some point.
I hope so. I hope you're right. I don't see it either. I don't quite see how we change this, but hopefully it will get a bit better in time.
Yeah, I mean, we're just kind of in the middle of it right now. And, the opposition's forming. You can see that. And there's people who are very concerned about
Mhm.
where we are now and where we're going. I listened to a thing this morning where this was a Doug Rushkoff podcast. Do you know Doug Rushkoff? Are you familiar with him? Well, he's kind of he does a lot of social commentary here in the U.S. He's written several books, and one of the things he was talking about was how if you look at what's happening right now, it seems that we're actually trying to engineer a collapse. And he had spoken to some billionaires, brought him in at one point and wanted him to consult with them about how the collapse, how things are going to collapse, because they were looking for it. They were like building bunkers. It was like they were trying to gather up all the all the nuts that they could and get them stored properly so that when the collapse comes, they'd be ready for it. And they almost seem to be hoping for this collapse. Um, I don't know whether that's true or not, but if you actually look at what's happening right now, it seems a lot more credible than it would have a decade ago.
Mm.
Anyway, but that's again, we're getting far afield. I had another question about um, that I thought you might have an opinion of kind of whether we're outsourcing our memories to machines,
Mm.
because we're storing so much. I mean, we're depending on machines to remember for us so much.
Yeah, yeah. And this takes me back to my very early days of my PhD, to be honest. So bear with me as I remember all of the details. Um, so yeah, I think we are to an extent, and I think that has always been the case as well, by the way. So there's something called, I think it's called transactive memory, whereby there's a process that humans don't need to remember everything, right? So if you consider that you're in a relationship with somebody, well, you and your partner don't need to remember all of the same things. That's really not a good use of your brain capacity, because we have a finite amount of memory, attention, processes, etc. So we've always done it to an extent, making notes, making lists for shopping, etc. We've always externalized some of our thoughts and memories, but I think the digital side of things is just pushed that on so far, that yes, I think it's becoming more and more apparent that we're doing that. And I think there's work in motion in terms of actually having chips that we can plug into ourselves, right, to download our memories and our thoughts and our yeah, contents of our brain, um, and store those externally. And that's a real thing people are researching and developing. So I think it's already happening with phones. People, particularly, not only, but particularly the younger generations, you see how they can't. This is very stereotyping, of course, not everybody, but typically, you need your phone. You feel very uncomfortable if your phone isn't too close to you, right? And I think that's because we actually invest so much. Oh, actually, I haven't got mine. But we invest so much of our resources within those devices now and it's becoming more and more apparent that I think it's gonna increase, and we are going to sort of.
I always wonder about this because, if you're somebody who's never learned a phone number in your life, what do you do if you're arrested, and who do you call when you don't have your phone because you don't know any of the numbers? That's always sort of struck me as an issue.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, if you follow that logic, you go all the way back to, wasn't it Socrates who deplored the development of writing because it was going to stop people from remembering huge tracts of poetry and stuff?
Yeah. And you see similar kind of things in terms of AI and calculators, right? So people say, well, what's the difference between when you introduce calculators to help with your maths,
They did not want to let calculators into exam rooms.
right?
I
And
remember.
now, so students will often say, well, using ChatGPT, it's like when you used a calculator in a maths exam, and it's like that
Well,
those parallels are drawn quite a lot,
it
and
it,
yeah,
it if you used a calculator in an arithmetic test, that would obviously make it pointless to have the test. Now, a math exam might have a lot more in it than arithmetic, and I'm willing to say that the calculator stops you from making simple arithmetical errors, but the real test is of reasoning, not of your ability to add and subtract.
mm,
With Chat GPT, I think it's more interesting, or at least it seems to me more logical to compare it to when you started when the internet started to become full of information. In the late 90s, there was an enormous scare about plagiarism for papers. And that led to the development of sites like Turnitin, where people submit students' papers to make sure they're not plagiarized. And you probably do it yourself. You're probably required to by your university.
yeah, yeah.
So, there seems to have been, it wouldn't surprise me if one of those companies figures out ways to detect AI-like essay writing.
Yeah. I mean, there are already AI detectors for that kind of thing. Again, I'm not 100% sure how good they are. And of course it evolves so quickly. The space moves so quickly that things that are effective one day may well not be the next, right? So it seems to always be a game of catch up.
Yeah, one thing that is Chat GPT has caused a crisis in the legal profession. Courts have been inundated with Chat GPT and other large language programs have created filings for the courts that contain hallucinated sightings. They cite a case that doesn't exist, and it's become apparently just so bad that the courts are really starting to try and identify these. And have you had that problem in European courts?
I don't know about European courts if that's happened. I've not heard of it, but I mean, we have that problem with academic writing for sure. Like with the hallucinations, like suddenly there are papers and a string of references that just don't actually exist. So I think, yeah, when using ChatGPT, you have to be a little bit careful, right? Because it will do those things, and you can't just take it at face value. I think interrogating it a little bit and working out, well, how is it helpful and how isn't it helpful? What should I lean on and what shouldn't I lean on is perhaps part of the process. But a lot of people just don't want to, right? They just take the output and run with it.
There was a recent case just the other day of a judge, calling a close to a case because the uh, plaintiff's attorney had used ChatGPT to do the filings, and it was filled with hallucinated citations. And when he was called to explain this, he submitted another document filled with more hallucinated, non-existent citations of law. And from what I've learned from talking to a few attorneys, it's become just like a nightmare in the courts, getting so much content. Just it's so easy to create it that people are just filling the courts with hallucinated content.
Mm, yeah. Wow.
Deep fake court cases. I think I think that's kind of amusing, actually. I I use ChatGPT some, and I think of it as an assistant,
Mm,
and I might ask it to do something that if I had somebody working for me as an assistant, I might ask them to do it. Um, but as I would with an assistant, I check the work,
mhm.
and it's important to check your work.
Yeah.
Um,
I think,
so
yeah, I agree. And I think a lot of people just don't. And I don't quite understand that. But again, it's different people will approach things differently. And I suppose if you can get away with it, or we think you can get away with it, then you're going to try it, right? Because you should see some of the things we get submissions wise, academic writing, etc. Um, yeah, some people will just want to try their luck. There's a lot of concern as well around AI generated reviews to papers and things like that. So there's, a lot of questionable reviewers outputs. So I don't know exactly who that's coming from and how you verify if it is or isn't AI generated, but it's certainly a concern that this is happening.
I mean, we've talked a lot about this kind of stuff. What are there other like urgent ethical challenges related to AI deployment that come up in your work that we haven't already talked about?
So I sort of briefly mentioned that the focus of the work that I'm doing now, which is the use of AI to create non-consensual intimate imagery. So I think that is a very urgent social use for area for this. That's something that, I mean, it's just growing and growing in terms of how people are using AI for that, and it's really scary because there isn't an awful lot people can do about it at this particular moment. So that's certainly one area.
Is that mostly like kind of creating pornographic imagery, or are there other ways that non-consensual imagery is used and comes up as an issue?
Yeah, so it's mainly, well, it could be creating content. That tends to be the main thing, but then it's sort of sharing it on particular sites, using it for various strategy. So it might be to blackmail somebody, or it might be a fraudulent type thing, trying to get money out of somebody, a sextortion type thing. It could be just, you know, I want to humiliate somebody, or something like that. So the use cases are quite varied, but it tends to be, yeah, using AI to generate some kind of sexually explicit content of an individual.
And if somebody asked you what we could do to address this, what the solutions might be, what would you say?
So I think there are lots of things that can be done and should be done. There are legal changes going through in England and Wales at the moment. There are some across the world. It's the thing again of different jurisdictions are moving at different rates, and some just aren't moving at all or don't even acknowledge it as a problem. And so because of the nature of the internet, of course, that means you can use a VPN to post something from another country, and if you post it from somewhere it's not illegal, the ramifications are very limited, if anything at all. But there are some legal changes, but I would say not enough. So potentially a more unified approach to that would be quite positive. Things like how awareness and understanding, well, what do you do if you're concerned that you've been targeted with this kind of content? That's another thing that's lacking. So, a lot of people won't necessarily understand the legal changes or understand, well, what should I do about this? Do I go to the police? And then if you go to the police, will the police take it seriously or not? How will they actually move forward and progress this? What evidence do I need to present? If I don't actually know, but I suspect, is that enough or not? So I think we need a lot more in terms of supporting people who've been targeted, and actually helping them through it. Support services as well. And the other thing I think is work with perpetrators, because this is not, predominantly women are targeted with this. That's just the fact at the moment. And I think there seems to be this rise linking with that sort of manosphere piece and the misogynistic views that are being circulated by particular individuals and influencers. There seems to be this sort of uptick in teenage boys creating and sharing this content, particularly in schools. So I think something there around education, acknowledging and learning about some of the very real harms that this kind of thing has. As I don't think we've moved away yet from, well, it's online, it's not real, so there's no harm. I think that is still a belief that a lot of people might hold, which is not true, not founded in the evidence. So I think changing those views as well.
Well, thank you. We have actually reached the end of the hour, and thanks so much for joining us today, Sophie.
No worries. Thank you for having me. It's been really fun.
Yeah, let's do it again sometime.
Sounds good.
You can stay in touch with Plutopia at plutopia.io. On Facebook, look for @Plutopia News. On Twitter, it's @Plutopia. This is the Plutopia News Network, 20 minutes into the future.